I wasn't looking for secrets that day. I was just cleaning the study, the room my husband never let me touch. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, the kind of day where the light comes in golden and sad through the windows, making everything look like a memory even while it's happening. Robert had just come home from the hospital after his heart surgery, and the doctor said he needed rest, needed peace, needed to avoid stress. So I took on the task of organizing his office, something I'd been asking to do for years, but he'd always refused, saying he had his own system, his own way of keeping things. The study was exactly what you'd expect from a man who spent 40 years as an accountant, meticulously organized, but somehow still cluttered with papers and files and boxes stacked in corners. I started with the desk drawers, sorting through old bills and tax documents, receipts from decades ago that should have been thrown out but weren't. And then I found it. A small wooden box pushed to the very back of the bottom drawer, beneath a pile of manila folders. It was the kind of box that holds something precious, something you don't want found. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled it out. Inside were photographs I'd never seen. Robert as a young man, maybe 22 or 23, with his arm around a beautiful dark haired woman I didn't recognize. And beneath the photos, a yellowed envelope addressed in his handwriting to someone named Clara. The letter inside was written on lined notebook paper, the kind we used in college, and dated June 15th, 1995, 29 years ago, 1 year after we got married. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat down on the floor right there, my back against his desk, and I read, Clara, I still think about you every night. I married Linda, but sometimes I wonder what our life might have been. I wonder if I made the right choice or if I just made the safe one. You were passion and risk and everything I was afraid of. Linda is stability and comfort and everything my parents wanted for me. But which one did I want for myself? I don't know anymore. I miss the way you laughed. I miss the way you challenged me. I miss who I was when I was with you. I'm sorry for how things ended. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to choose you. I think about calling you, about writing to you, about running to you. But I won't, because I made my choice and I have to live with it, even if it means spending the rest of my life wondering what if. Robert, I read the letter 3 times, 4 times. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, and he never sent it. The envelope was sealed but never stamped, never mailed, just tucked away in a box for 29 years. It felt like reading a ghost story. Only this ghost was living right next to me, sleeping beside me every night, eating breakfast across from me every morning. I sat on that floor for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes trying to understand what I'd just discovered. Who was Clara? Why had Robert kept this letter? Did he still think about her? Had our entire marriage been a lie? My name is Linda Forrester. I'm 58 years old. I've been married to Robert for 30 years. We have 2 children, Michael, who's 28 and working as a lawyer in Chicago, and Sarah, who's 25 and just finished graduate school. On paper, we have a good life. A nice house in the suburbs, stable finances, grown children we're proud of. But if I'm being honest, and I suppose now is the time for honesty, our marriage has been comfortable rather than passionate for as long as I can remember. We're not the couple who holds hands or leaves love notes or can't wait to see each other at the end of the day. We're the couple who have a routine, who know each other's schedules, who coexist peacefully but without much fire. I always told myself that was normal. That passion fades and what remains is partnership. That the butterflies and excitement of young love naturally transform into something quieter, steadier, less exciting but more reliable. But holding that letter in my hands, I realized something I'd never let myself fully acknowledge. Robert and I had never had that passionate beginning. Our relationship had always been quiet and steady. We met through mutual friends when I was 26 and he was 28. We dated for 2 years in a pleasant, unremarkable way. I proposed because it seemed like the next logical step. I said yes because he was kind and stable and my mother approved. We got married because that's what people our age did. And we stayed married because we were both too decent, too responsible, too afraid of disappointing people to do anything else. But Clara was passion. Clara was the one he wrote letters to at midnight. Clara was the one he wondered about, the one who made him question everything. And me, I was the safe choice. The compromise, the woman he married because his parents approved, not because he couldn't imagine his life without me. I put the letter back in the envelope carefully, placed it back in the box, and closed the drawer. I didn't know what to do with what I'd just learned. I couldn't unknow it, couldn't unsee those words, but I also couldn't confront Robert about it, not right after surgery, not when his heart was literally fragile and healing. So I did what I'd always done. I kept quiet. I carried the weight alone. That night, I watched Robert sleeping peacefully in our bed, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of someone who has no idea his world is about to change. I studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the way his mouth relaxed in sleep. This was the man I'd spent 3 decades with, the father of my children, my partner in building a life, but looking at him, I realized I didn't really know him. I knew his routines, his preferences, his habits, but I didn't know his heart. I didn't know his regrets. I didn't know the version of himself he'd buried when he chose me over Clara. And suddenly, 30 years of memories felt different. Every moment we'd shared, our wedding day, the births of our children, holidays and anniversaries, and quiet Sunday mornings, all of it was tinged now with the knowledge that part of him had always been somewhere else. With someone else, I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake replaying moments from our marriage, searching for clues I'd missed. The times he'd been distant, the times he'd stared out the window lost in thought, the times he'd seemed sad for reasons I couldn't identify. Had he been thinking about her? About Clara? About the life he didn't choose? And what about me? Had I ever been more than a placeholder? A decent woman who filled a role but never filled his heart? The questions spiraled in my mind until I felt like I was drowning in them. I got up at 3 a.m. and went back to the study. I took out the box again and looked through the photographs. Robert and Clara at what looked like a beach, both young and laughing. Robert and Clara at a concert, his arm around her shoulders. Robert and Clara kissing, his hand tangled in her dark hair. They looked happy. More than happy, they looked alive in a way I'd never seen him look with me. The next morning, I made breakfast like always. Robert came downstairs slowly, still recovering from surgery, and sat at the table. Sleep well? He asked. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the letter in his face. I wanted to demand answers, but instead I smiled and said, "Fine, how about you?" He nodded. "Pretty good, the pain's getting better." We ate in silence, the way we usually did, but now the silence felt suffocating. I looked at him across the table, this stranger I'd been married to for 30 years, and I wondered if he was thinking about Clara, if he'd ever stopped thinking about her, if I'd spent 3 decades sleeping next to a man whose heart belonged to someone else. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I needed to know who Clara was, what had happened between them, why they'd broken up. I started digging through old photo albums, looking for any other trace of her. I found a few more pictures: Clara at what looked like a college party, Clara sitting on a picnic blanket, Clara in Robert's dorm room. She was beautiful. Dark hair, bright eyes, a smile that suggested mischief and intelligence. She looked like the kind of woman who took risks, who lived fully, who wouldn't settle for a safe, quiet life in the suburbs. I felt a surge of jealousy so intense it surprised me. Jealous of a woman I'd never met, jealous of a relationship that had ended before I even came into the picture. But I was jealous of what she'd had with Robert, the passion, the intensity, the version of him that had written that letter. I called Robert's college roommate, Mark, who I'd met a few times over the years. "Mark, this is Linda, Robert's wife. I was hoping I could ask you something." He sounded surprised to hear from me but agreed to talk. "Do you remember a woman named Clara from college?" "Someone Robert dated?" There was a pause. "Clara Brennan, yeah, I remember her. Why? What happened between them?" Another pause, longer this time. "Linda, I don't know if I should. Please, Mark, I need to know." He sighed. They were together for about 3 years, pretty serious. Everyone thought they'd get married. But then Robert's parents got involved. They didn't approve of Clara. She was too unconventional, too unpredictable. They wanted him to settle down with someone more traditional. They introduced him to you. And Robert, well, he always had trouble standing up to his parents. He broke up with Clara pretty suddenly. She was devastated, moved to Seattle shortly after. I don't think she ever got married. That's all I know. I hung up the phone feeling sick. Robert hadn't chosen me. He'd chosen his parents' approval. He'd chosen safety over love, obligation over passion. And I'd been so oblivious, so grateful that someone wanted to marry me, that I'd never questioned whether he actually loved me or just needed a wife who fit the role his parents had scripted for him. I felt humiliated, angry, heartbroken. But mostly I felt like a fool. How had I not seen this? How had I spent 30 years with someone and never realized I was the consolation prize? A week after finding the letter, I couldn't take it anymore. Robert was sitting in his recliner reading the newspaper when I walked into the room holding the envelope. "Robert, who is Clara?" He looked up. His face went completely white. The newspaper slipped from his hands. "Where did you find that?" he whispered. "In your study, in a box you never let me look through. Who is she?" He closed his eyes. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was hoarse. "She was someone I knew a long time ago, before you, before everything." "You wrote this letter a year after we got married, Robert. That's not before me, that's during me, during us." He flinched like I'd struck him. I know how it looks." "How it looks? It looks like you married me while you were in love with someone else. It looks like I've spent 30 years with a man who wished he'd chosen differently. It looks like our entire marriage is a lie." "That's not, Linda, it's not that simple." "Then explain it to me. Make me understand why you kept a letter to another woman for 29 years. Make me understand why you wrote that you wondered if you'd made the right choice in marrying me." Tears were streaming down my face now. "Make me understand why I wasn't enough." Robert stood up slowly, wincing slightly from the surgery pain. He walked over to me and tried to take my hands, but I pulled away. "Linda, please, let me explain." "I'm listening." He sat down heavily on the couch, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Clara and I met in college. We were both young, both idealistic, both convinced we were going to change the world. She was everything I wasn't: brave, spontaneous, passionate. She made me feel alive. We were together for 3 years. I was going to propose. But then my father got sick, and my parents started putting pressure on me to settle down, to marry someone they approved of. Someone stable and sensible. Clara wasn't those things. She wanted to travel, to take risks, to live unconventionally. My parents were horrified by her. They threatened to cut me off financially if I didn't end it. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I was weak, Linda. I was 25 years old and terrified of disappointing my parents. So I broke up with Clara. She was devastated. She moved away. And I did what I was told. I got a stable job. I dated appropriate women, and I met you. You were kind. You were smart. You were everything my parents wanted, so I married you. The words hit me like physical blows. Did you ever love me, Robert, or was I just convenient? I did love you, I do love you, but he hesitated. But not the way you loved Clara. He didn't deny it. That silence was more devastating than anything he could have said. That letter, I said quietly. Why did you write it if you weren't going to send it? Because I needed to get it out of my head. We'd been married a year and I was miserable. Not because of you, you were a good wife, a good person, but because I felt trapped, like I'd made this huge decision based on fear rather than love. I wrote the letter thinking maybe if I got all those feelings out on paper, I could move past them. I addressed it to Clara, but I never intended to send it. It was just closure, I guess, or an attempt at closure. But you kept it. For 29 years, you kept it. I know. Don't have a good excuse for that. Maybe part of me wasn't ready to let go of who I was back then. The version of myself that was brave enough to love someone dangerous. The version that existed before I became the man my parents wanted me to be. I sat down across from him, the letter still in my hands. Do you know what it's like to realize you've been living a compromise? That the person you built a life with, the person you gave 3 decades to, sees you as the safe choice, the backup plan. You weren't a backup plan, Linda. That's exactly what I was. My voice broke. I was the woman you married because Clara was too scary, too real, too much, and I was manageable, acceptable, good enough. That's not fair. Isn't it, Robert? You wrote this letter 1 year into our marriage. 1 year. We just started our life together and you were already regretting it, already wishing you'd chosen her instead of me. He was crying now too, silent tears running down his face. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Linda. I never meant to hurt you. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I said, did you ever try to contact her after you wrote this? He shook his head. No, I thought about it. God, I thought about it so many times, but I didn't because I made a choice and I had to live with it. You deserved better than a husband who was constantly looking backward. But that's exactly what you were, Robert. You were looking backward. You just did it quietly enough that I didn't notice. He had no answer for that. I stood up. I need some space. I'm going to stay at Sarah's for a few days. Linda, please don't go. We can work through this. I don't know if we can. I don't know if I want to. I need time to think. I walked upstairs, packed a bag, and left. In my rearview mirror, I could see Robert standing in the doorway looking lost and broken. Good, I thought bitterly. Now you know how I feel? I stayed at Sarah's apartment for 4 days. She knew something was wrong but didn't push for details, and I was grateful for that. I spent those days replaying my entire marriage in my mind, trying to figure out what had been real and what had been performance. Had Robert ever really loved me, or had he just convinced himself he did because it was easier than admitting he'd made a mistake? Had any of our happy moments been genuine, or had he been thinking about Clara during all of them? The questions consumed me. On the fourth night, I couldn't sleep. I went to Sarah's living room at 2 a.m. and took out the letter again. I'd brought it with me, unable to leave it behind. I read it again, slowly this time, and that's when I saw something I'd missed before. The letter didn't end with, I miss who I was when I was with you. There was more. At the very bottom, in smaller handwriting, as if he'd added it later, it said, Clara, I thought I loved you, but I realize love is not what burns quickly, it's what stays when everything else dies. You were the fire, but fire burns out. Linda is the warmth that keeps you alive through winter. I'm learning that maybe my parents weren't entirely wrong. Maybe I needed to learn the difference between passion and love. Maybe I needed to grow up. I stared at those words. He had written it to say goodbye. Not to rekindle anything, but to let go. The letter wasn't a declaration of eternal love for Clara. It was his way of trying to make peace with the choice he'd made, trying to convince himself that choosing safety over passion wasn't cowardice but maturity. I don't know why that changed things for me, but it did. Not completely. Not enough to erase the hurt. But enough to make me realize that maybe, just maybe, Robert wasn't the villain I'd been making him out to be. Maybe he was just a scared young man who made a choice based on fear and then spent 3 decades trying to live with it, trying to make it mean something, trying to turn obligation into love. I went back home the next morning. Robert was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw me, relief flooded his face. Linda, I was so worried. We need to talk. I sat down across from him. I read the whole letter, Robert, the end of it. The part where you were trying to convince yourself that marrying me was the right choice. He nodded slowly. I was trying to make sense of it, trying to believe I hadn't just ruined my life. And did you believe it, I mean? He was quiet for a long moment. Eventually, not right away, but over time, yes, you became the most real thing in my life, Linda. Not Clara, you, the woman who was there when my mother died, the woman who held my hand during the difficult years, the woman who raised our children with me. Clara was a dream, you were reality. And reality, you turned out to be better than any dream. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him, but part of me couldn't forget that he'd kept that letter for 29 years. Why didn't you ever tell me about her? Because I was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd let my parents control my life. Ashamed that I'd hurt someone I cared about. Ashamed that I'd married you for the wrong reasons, even if eventually I came to love you for the right ones. You deserve someone who chose you first, without hesitation, without doubt. And I didn't. I chose you because I was told to. The fact that I grew to truly love you doesn't erase how it started. He reached across the table, and this time, I let him take my hand. I'm sorry I kept the letter. I'm sorry I never told you. I'm sorry for all of it. But Linda, please believe me when I say that you are not second place. You were never second place. You were just first place that I took a long time to recognize. We started going to couples therapy after that. It was hard, painful. We had to confront truths we'd both been avoiding for decades, that our marriage had started as an arrangement more than a romance, that we'd both been going through the motions for years without really connecting, that we'd built a life together without ever really building intimacy. But we also rediscovered things. Robert told me stories I'd never heard about his childhood, his fears, his dreams. I told him about my own insecurities, my own disappointments. We started dating again, as strange as that sounds after 30 years of marriage. We went to dinner and actually talked. We took walks and held hands. We learned to be vulnerable with each other in ways we never had been. 3 months after I found the letter, Robert got an infection from his surgery site and had to be rushed back to the hospital. I sat beside his bed for 2 days while he fought fever and complications. And I realized something: I loved him. Not the version of him I'd imagined, not the husband I'd wanted him to be, but the actual man lying in that hospital bed. Flawed, scared, full of regrets, but trying, always trying. When he woke up, the first thing he said was, "I'm sorry." I smiled. For what? For everything. For not being brave enough 30 years ago, for keeping secrets, for not loving you the way you deserved from the beginning. Robert, I said gently, people don't start with love. Sometimes they grow into it. And maybe that's not romantic, but it's real. You showed up every day, you were faithful, you were a good father, you tried, that counts for something? But the universe, it seems, had other plans. 2 weeks after that hospital stay, Robert died. Another heart attack, sudden and massive. One moment he was reading in his chair, and the next he was gone. I was devastated, not just by his death, but by the timing. We'd finally started to truly know each other, and now he was gone. At his funeral, our children spoke beautifully about him. Our friends shared memories, and I stood at the front holding that letter, the one that had almost destroyed us but also in a strange way saved us, because it forced us to be honest. It forced us to confront the comfortable lies we'd been living. After everyone left, after the burial, I went back to the study. I took out the letter one last time and read it through. And then I did something I'd been planning since the funeral. I went to the cemetery alone and opened Robert's casket for one final moment before they sealed the grave. I placed the letter inside, tucked against his chest. "You never sent it, Robert," I whispered, "but I'll deliver it for you. To the past you finally let go of. To the man you were before you became who you needed to be. Rest now, you don't have to carry this anymore." I closed the casket and walked away. Months have passed now. I'm learning to live alone, learning to be just Linda instead of Linda and Robert. And I've been thinking a lot about that letter, about what it meant, about what it taught me. We all carry unsent letters in our hearts. Letters to people we've hurt, letters to versions of ourselves we've lost, letters to roads not taken. Some are apologies, some are regrets, some are just memories of what might have been. But real love, the kind that lasts, isn't about the letters we wrote. It's about the ones we finally stopped needing to send. It's about showing up, about staying, about choosing the same person every day, even when it's hard, even when it's not passionate, even when it's just quietly making breakfast together on a Tuesday morning. Robert kept that letter for 29 years, but he chose me for 30. He wrote those words, but he lived a different truth. And maybe that's what love really is. Not the grand romantic gestures, not the burning passion that consumes you, but the steady decision to stay, to try, to build something real out of imperfect materials. I'm not going to pretend our marriage was perfect. It wasn't. It started for the wrong reasons and took decades to find its footing. But it was ours. And in the end, that was enough, because love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, about being honest, about learning to see each other, really see each other, and choosing to stay anyway. Robert chose me, maybe not at first. Maybe not in the way I'd dreamed of as a young woman reading romance novels.